Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Morgan, editor of Fleet Equipment, and welcome to Fleet Equipment Unscripted. Today, we're talking with Thomas Healy, CEO of Hyliion. Thomas, good to see you again. Thanks for coming back. Lots to talk about here.
Thanks for having me back on again. No, it's an exciting time, and looking forward to getting to share more of what's going on and just discussing what's new in the industry. As everyone that's following this knows, I mean, things are moving at a fast pace right now.
Holy smokes, that's true. Before we started recording, we were just talking about how we talked not even 6 months ago and things have changed. So glad to connect with you here and kind of guide me and us through what you're seeing and what's happening. So let's start with that overall sustainability conversation, because I kind of feel like that's how the industry is moving now. Electric trucks, a good number of them have launched. You have your axle offering, the hybrid axle on the market, in addition to some other offerings, and it's really becoming, okay, how do I make my fleet sustainable, not how do I make my fleet one solution or the other, right? When you're talking with fleets, what do you recommend in terms of overall sustainability strategy, and how do you see that planning going forward in the next couple of years?
So the first is starting with the fleets. I mean, I think the sustainability push is here and it's here to stay and it's becoming real, right? I mean, there's always kind of been the push on, oh, we need to go to greener, we need to reduce emissions, and there's been huge advancements, after treatment systems and everything. But now we're getting to a point where large corporations, frankly, the guys who pay to ship stuff, are now coming out with mandates that they're moving towards either reductions in emissions or even going to zero emissions, right? I mean, I think that's the big push that we saw come out of Amazon originally, is there's a target there to go to zero emissions for their whole organization. Obviously, trucking is a huge part of that. And so, I think, we normally think of trucking as, first is, let's figure out how to get things from point A to point B as cheap as possible, and be able to offer those services as inexpensively as possible. But now I think it's a shakeup. It's a new mix that's going to be taking place here of, we got to worry about what are the tailpipe emissions coming out of these vehicles, or what's the overall emissions from them. And, we're seeing this shift towards electrification, a lot more players coming into the space. And I think we're starting to see the different strategies take hold, right? I think, we're seeing the OEMs bring forward fully electric local delivery vehicles. They are range limited, but that's good for that type of application, right? Because you don't want a huge battery pack if you don't need it. Then you have other players that are more going after the long haul space, which is where Hyliion's playing right now.
Right. Yeah, and that's a space that's really shaken up now. Hydrogen is coming more into the conversation, but you've been doing this while we've been in the hybrid axle outfitted truck before. We've ridden in it, we've seen how it operates. More recently, though, you've made a push into renewable natural gas. What prompted that move? What's your view of that market, and do you see it being another niche, or do you see some expanding growth there?
Yeah, so our vision is, we see this push towards electrification, but there's going to be different types of solutions that are great for different parts of the market, right? It's not a one size fits all solution. So we see our hybrid solution as a great way to get a step into electrification. And then we've recently announced the Hypertruck solution, which is a fully electric drivetrain. So, rear axle purely driven off of electric power. But then we actually use an onboard generator in order to produce electricity as you're going. So best way to think about it is you're kind of bringing that power plant with you, right? So as opposed to plugging into the grid to recharge, we're actually producing the electricity locally on the truck. And that's where the renewable natural gas comes into play, because we can actually use RNG or CNG to actually produce electricity at the truck level. And what we found is it offers a lot less cost of operation compared to a normal BEV truck. We can get away with a lot smaller battery pack. And it also offers even a stronger emissions profile than even plugging into the grid. So the truck, producing the electricity locally is actually cleaner than using grid electricity. And so that's where we see that as, a great step for the industry to be able to move into electric long haul trucking. And then I think there's a lot of discussion, as you mentioned, around hydrogen and fuel cell, right? Is that going to be the wave of the future? And we believe in hydrogen and fuel cell as well. We're actually designing our powertrain to be able to be agnostic. So as fuel cell technology and hydrogen infrastructure gets built out, we have the ability to switch out a natural gas generator to a hydrogen generator. And the rest of the powertrain stays the same, though. So we're kind of future-proofing ourselves in that capacity. And we'll see. I think hydrogen has a lot of promise, but there's a lot of pieces that still need to come into play in order to get to a future hydrogen infrastructure versus that natural gas and renewable natural gas. It's already there.
No, and I mean, it's a great parallel to what fleets are already used to on the APU side as well, right? And being that on the diesel, being able to supplement that, save a little bit on fuel in those certain applications. But in this regard, kind of you brought that range extension to completely green, renewable energy application. Very cool. Is the conversation now? We've talked about tailpipe emissions, very important, and trying to get rid of those. But the renewable part, people are latching on more to, right? We're hearing people say it's great that the truck has no emissions, but we also need the source from which it comes to have less or no emissions, right? Is that something that fleets should pay attention to? Is that in their conversation right now when you talk to them, or is it still just focused on the truck right now?
Yeah, so I think the important thing to focus on is well to wheel and kind of overall emissions, right? So to take an electric truck, plug it in and say, hey, this is a zero polluting vehicle. Well, you really need to look at where did that electricity come from, right? If it came from wind and solar, that's fantastic. But if it came from a coal-fired power plant, we're not doing much good for the environment, right? And so that's where it's really looking at well to wheel. And as we see some of these larger companies kind of put out their statements of they're moving to reductions in emissions, or they're moving to zero emissions, like we mentioned Amazon before. They're looking at well to wheel. They're not just looking at what comes out of the tailpipe, right? So, so from that standpoint, I think it's important to look at the whole picture. And this renewable natural gas is pretty fascinating, and one that a lot of people aren't paying attention to or haven't heard of before. But it's basically the same as natural gas, but it's coming from a different source. So it's actually coming from capturing emissions coming off of landfills and dairy farms, things that normally would have been a pollutant to the atmosphere, as opposed to just letting them gas off. Now farms are actually capturing those gases, pumping them into the pipelines. And when you actually go use that in a vehicle to drive the vehicle, you don't have the same level of emissions. You have a lot less. So what it actually creates is an opportunity where you can even have net carbon negative or below zero emissions profiles, right? So then you get to a point where it's actually cleaner for an organization to go drive the truck as opposed to not drive it, because the gas came from what would have been pollutants originally. Right.
No, for sure. Definitely amazing technology. This is all very cool, and I know fleets are interested in it. We see a lot of engagement on our side, but for fleets that are mid-sized, right, or smaller fleets, that the fleet managers are wearing a lot of hats, and now they go, great, I've never had to worry about where my fuel comes from before, right, like the source of it. Where do you start? How do I, even in my smaller fleet operation, 100 to 500 trucks maybe, how do I get started? What's your advice for jumping into this and making it work for me still?
Yeah, so from our standpoint, I mean, we're engaging with fleets right now in deploying our hybrid solution. The Hypertruck solution, we'll be putting initial demos out this year, towards the end of this year. And so, we're looking for that fleet engagement. But I think, one of the things that fleets are finding is solutions aren't really available yet. You can't go down to the Volvo dealer or the Freightliner dealer and really just go pick up an electric truck off the lot yet. We're not at that stage. So, for fleet operators, I think, getting engaged with your OEMs, getting engaged with companies like Hyliion, and really building out, when is that product going to get launched and adopted, and seeing how it fits for you, right? I mean, there'll be fleets that BEV makes a ton of sense. There'll be fleets that our solution makes a ton of sense. Other fleets, if you've already got hydrogen infrastructure coming into your facility, maybe you're using it in forklifts or something like that, maybe that's a good solution for you then, right? So there are some areas where, there's going back to our earlier statement, not one solution fits all. And, I think that's important for fleets to realize and just figure out what makes the most sense for them. And then, one of the things that often maybe gets overlooked by fleets that we've spoken with that it's really important to pay attention to is just infrastructure, right? Because if you're going to move to BEV trucks, you're signing up for putting in recharging infrastructure at your depots. And, we've heard some fleets share with us that, like, for a 150 truck terminal, they're getting quoted, $30 million to put in recharging infrastructure, which for a lot of fleets, that's not going to work, right? One of the advantages we have with the Hypertruck and using natural gas is there are already 700 stations already deployed across the US that you can just drive up to and start refueling on, right? They're already there. And then you get to work with those station providers to spec how much of the fuel you want to come from renewable natural gas and how much of it you want to come just from conventional natural gas, depending on what your priorities are.
Yeah, for sure. And as we've seen, fleets and OEMs and suppliers alike trying to move more to sustainability, those partnerships are key. A lot of them, service, is one component that we haven't touched on either, right?
Yep.
It gets more complex in some ways because it's not as familiar as the diesel powertrain, right? But there's oftentimes less complexity inherent in there. It's kind of a weird double edge where you have to retrain technicians on new technology and you want to make sure that's safe. And again, just making those connections, right, on that infrastructure and getting that ball rolling. So definitely cool to see.
So yeah, service is a big one, right? Because every truck depot out there knows how to service diesel trucks today. As we move to electric and natural gas and hydrogen, there's new games, right? One of the nice things with natural gas is there are already service centers all across the U.S. that have trained up and know how to use natural gas. But electric, hydrogen, it is new, and what we're finding on the electric side of things is, one, you have a lot less moving parts, so that's good because that just inherently means you're going to have less maintenance. But the interesting thing is that it's not really go in and repair the vehicle; it's more go in and replace parts, right? Which is going to be a little bit of a change. I think truck centers today are used to go in, find the problem, go solve it, go fix whatever is broken. Versus electric's going to be more, if this module isn't working, replace the whole thing and ship the unit back to the manufacturer.
Right. Yeah. And even in like what those components are, the specifics of that components, right? I was just thinking, I talked with Shell not too long ago about fluids that'll specifically go into some of the electric powertrains that they're working on and all that good stuff. But it is a complex thing that is just a big sea change in that regard. I had one more. So do you have fleets that, do you feel like they're more open to that kind of a partnership? Oftentimes fleets will buy diesels and then talk to other manufacturers and nameplates their next turn cycle and that kind of stuff. And this is requiring a more cohesive, almost partnership and give and take between the suppliers, OEMs, and the fleets. Are they looking for that? Are they open for that? How do you work through that with your customers?
So the nice thing we're seeing is that everyone's taken the shift towards electrification so seriously that everyone, all the OEMs are trying to figure out what path is going to make the most sense here. Fleets are trying to figure that out. Tier 1 suppliers are trying to figure it out. And right now, it's a very, very collaborative space, right? And people are trying to work together towards solutions. I don't think, at least we're not seeing that people are really coming in and saying, nope, we're not going to work with others. We're just going to do it all ourselves, right? And that's been Hylion's approach. And that's one of the reasons why when we initially stepped back and looked at the ERX, sure, we brainstormed about, do we create the entire truck and the powertrain as well? And we looked and we said, well, the area for evolution here is really in the powertrain. Trucks are great today. OEMs have done a fantastic job of improving them, improving aero, comfortability, everything, right? And we don't need to go reinvent that again, right? The area for evolution is the powertrain. And so that's where our goal is, let's step into this market as, a powertrain provider, not a full vehicle provider. And let's use the chassis that fleets already know and love in order to be able to deploy our product on. And, the feedback we've gotten from fleets is they love that because, fleets have already kind of chosen. Do they want to use Peterbilt? Do they want to use Freightliner, right? They've made those choices. And now we're able to come in and say, we can, put our powertrain in those vehicles.
Right. Yeah. And as much as things change, that still speaks to the supplier nature and the relationships that fleets have grown over the decades and how it's still very much a handshake business. So even with the fun technology and new changes, a lot of the same faces and friends that'll help you out.
Very true. And amazing thing is very different than the passenger car space, right? That's one of the big questions we also often get, with having just gone public, a lot of retail investor interest in Hyliion. And people are like, what do you mean you're going to put a different powertrain in a car or in this truck? Because people are thinking a passenger car where no way you'd ever be able to do that versus, there's that difference of trucking. These trucks are made very customized for the fleet that they're going to. in this sort of a model works, where that doesn't work in the normal passenger car space.
No, for sure. And even as long as I've been covering the industry now, to your point, even how that is operating on the fleet level of speccing and speccing what you want on the truck, from whom, the supplier, it is in constant evolution. So it's fun to watch.
And this whole shift is exciting, right? I mean, everyone, I encourage, fleets that are watching this, get engaged in this, right? There's a lot of moving parts going on right now, and make sure you're part of this shift, because it's going to happen, and you want to be on on the front end of it, as opposed to, trying to catch up to your competitors. So get engaged in it, start working with electric suppliers, and partake in this shift towards a much cleaner and renewable source of energy here.
For sure. Thomas, thank you so much for catching up. It's great to see you. I'm sure I will talk to you again soon when all this evolves so rapidly in the next 3 months, and we'll have even more to talk about.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me on.
Take care.